In 1994, a 12-year-old girl walked onto a blood-soaked film set in New York City, earning a microscopic fraction of what a completely unhinged British actor was paid to psychologically terrorize her. How did a deeply controversial French action thriller permanently forge a billion-dollar Hollywood empire, and who was ultimately left behind with nothing but a minimum union wage? The explosive bullet holes in that apartment have long said, been plastered over, but the ruthless financial reality of 2026 finally uncovers the absolute truth. Number 1. Gary Oldman, $1,000,000. $1,500. Commanding the highest financial leverage on the bullet-riddled set was a man who did not even play the title character. At 36 years old, Gary Oldman, born in London to a fiercely working-class family with a welder for a father, unleashed absolute, unchecked psychological terror onto the screen. He flawlessly embodied Norman Stansfield, the deeply corrupt, pill-popping DEA agent, whose explosive massacre violently sets the entire tragic narrative into motion. Bringing pure theatrical madness to the gritty streets, Oldman was actually the most bankable international star attached to the risky production, having just achieved massive success with blockbusters like JFK and Bram Stoker's Dracula. Because he carried the immense burden of domestic box office marketability, his representatives secured the ultimate premium rate. For injecting pure cinematic dread into a limited amount of screen time, the studio handed him the absolute highest upfront salary of the entire cast, officially estimated between $1 million and $1.5 million. Today, in the complex reality of 2026, the 68-year-old British powerhouse remains vibrantly alive, sitting untouched atop a colossal cinematic empire. Never allowing himself to be typecast purely as a screaming 90s villain, Oldman constantly reinvented his chameleonic identity, eventually capturing an Academy Award and dominating prestige streaming television. He completely rejected the brutal attrition rate that swallows most actors over the decades. The modern public does not view him merely as a psychotic, corrupt cop screaming for backup. They fiercely revere him as an untouchable titan of the acting craft, who manipulated a lucrative supporting gig into an unparalleled legendary Hollywood legacy. Number 2. Reno, $500. $800. Opposing the flamboyant villain was the quiet, lethal soul of the film. At 46, Reno, born in Casablanca to working-class Spanish parents fleeing dictatorship, stepped onto the unforgiving New York asphalt. He flawlessly embodied Léon, the illiterate, socially isolated, yet incredibly deadly hitman, whose solitary existence is violently shattered by a desperate orphan. Despite being the definitive male lead and the director's absolute cinematic muse, Reno was essentially an unproven financial commodity in the massive North American box office market in 1994. Reflecting the highly cautious reality of an established European star attempting a risky Hollywood crossover, his contract bypassed any lucrative back-end percentages. To secure his iconic melancholic stoicism, the studio handed him a flat, upfront salary, officially estimated between $500,000 and $800,000. In the profound reality of 2026, the 77-year-old international veteran remains vibrantly alive, living a highly secure life far from the desperate vanity of the American blockbuster machine. Never consumed by sudden Hollywood fame, Reno intelligently leveraged his brutal breakout role to secure decades of lucrative appearances in massive global franchises, while fiercely maintaining his dominance in European cinema. He rests comfortably upon a substantial multi-million-dollar fortune, entirely insulated from the catastrophic bankruptcies that often destroy aging stars. Still, occasionally acting on his own uncompromising terms, he completely rejects the grueling studio system. The modern public does not view him merely as a quiet assassin clutching a fragile houseplant. They fiercely revere him as a majestic, cross-cultural acting titan who brilliantly manipulated a modest crossover paycheck into permanent, unshakable global immortality. Number 3. Aiello, $250. $400. Operating as the deceptive paternal anchor to the lethal assassin was a heavyweight veteran of the cinematic underworld. At 61, Aiello, born in Manhattan to a deeply working-class Italian-American family, brought immense, authentic street gravitas to the blood-soaked thriller. He flawlessly embodied Tony, the manipulative mob handler, who coldly dictates Léon's executions while ruthlessly hoarding the illiterate killer's massive fortune. Bringing vital, seasoned weight to the criminal ecosystem, Aiello had already achieved prestigious Oscar-nominated heights prior to stepping onto the gritty New York set. Because he was an established powerhouse, hired to legitimize the dark narrative, his representatives negotiated a premium supporting rate. To secure his commanding treacherous warmth, the production handed him a lucrative upfront salary, officially estimated between $250,000 and $400,000. In the stark reality of 2026, the cinematic world has long mourned the profound loss of this larger-than-life titan. Aiello passed away in 2019 at 86, leaving behind an incredibly secure, bulletproof legacy and a substantial fortune. He never suffered the devastating Hollywood downfalls that consumed so many of his aging peers. He fiercely dedicated his final years to independent cinema and passionately recording jazz albums, firmly rejecting the superficial vanity of the modern studio system. The public of 2026 does not view him merely as a treacherous, double-crossing mob boss sitting safely in a restaurant. They fiercely revere him as a majestic, quintessential New York character actor who permanently elevated a violent European thriller into an undeniable immortal masterpiece. Number 4. Natalie Portman, $25,000 $50,000. At a mere 12 years old, Natalie Portman, born in Jerusalem to an American mother and an Israeli father, who worked as a gynecologist, stepped into an unimaginably dark and violent cinematic crossfire. Making her absolute feature film debut, she flawlessly embodied Mathilda, the profoundly traumatized, chain-smoking orphan, desperately begging an illiterate hitman to teach her the brutal art of vengeance. Carrying an immense, devastating emotional burden that would have easily shattered seasoned veterans, her raw performance became the undisputed soul of the controversial masterpiece. However, because she was an absolute newcomer navigating a notoriously unforgiving industry, she held zero financial negotiating leverage. Strictly adhering to the absolute baseline minimums dictated by the Screen Actors Guild for debut child actors, she received absolutely no back-end percentage points. For enduring this grueling psychological gauntlet, the studio handed her a shockingly tiny upfront salary, officially estimated between $25,000 and $50,000. Today, in the relentless reality of 2026, the 44-year-old visionary remains vibrantly alive, sitting untouched upon a massive multi-million-dollar cinematic empire. She flatly refused to become another tragic discarded casualty of child stardom. Instead, Portman violently conquered the Hollywood machine, securing a prestigious Academy Award, anchoring multi-billion-dollar blockbuster franchises, and fiercely establishing herself as a powerhouse producer. She completely rejected the toxic exploitation that routinely destroys young actors, aggressively commanding her career entirely on her own uncompromising terms. The modern public does not view her merely as a traumatized, severely underpaid little girl clutching a fragile potted plant. They fiercely revere her as an absolute untouchable Hollywood titan who brilliantly manipulated a microscopic $25,000 debut into an immortal history-making artistic dynasty. Number 5. Payday Appel, $15,000 $25,000. Standing firmly in the explosive shadow of the chaotic primary villain was a dependable New York character actor. At 34, Payday Appel, born in New York City, brought vital, grounded realism to the corrupt precinct. He flawlessly embodied Malky, the fiercely loyal right-hand man, attempting to manage Stansfield's unhinged madness before meeting his own brutal demise at the hands of the unseen assassin. Operating strictly within the machinery of the gritty law enforcement ensemble, his financial compensation was rigidly dictated by standard Screen Actors Guild guidelines. Paid systematically on a weekly rate for his required days on the urban sets, he received zero back-end percentages. To secure his highly effective street-smart supporting presence, the production handed him a modest upfront salary, officially estimated between $15,000 and $25,000. In the stark reality of 2026, the 66-year-old actor remains vibrantly alive, completely untethered from the toxic desperation of Hollywood fame. Never obsessed with chasing leading man vanity, Appel intelligently carved out an incredibly resilient decades-long career as a sought-after television character actor and prolific voiceover artist for massive video, game franchises like Grand Theft Auto. He completely rejected the brutal attrition rate that routinely destroys minor supporting actors. Securing a quiet, deeply respected existence, he steadily continues working entirely on his own terms. The modern public does not view him merely as a forgotten, underpaid cinematic henchman. They fiercely revere him as a definitive, unstoppable working-class talent who brilliantly manipulated a tiny union paycheck into permanent, unbreakable artistic independence. Number 6. Michael Badalucco, $10, $15. At 40 years old, Michael Badalucco, born in Brooklyn to a fiercely working-class Italian-American family with a set carpenter for a father, stepped into the suffocating, grim apartment set. He flawlessly embodied Mathilda's deeply abusive, unnamed father, a desperate, small-time criminal stealing from heavily armed, violently unhinged, corrupt cops. His catastrophic fate serves as the absolute explosive catalyst that forces the young orphan into the arms of the silent assassin. Bringing intense, sweaty dread to a brief but structurally critical sequence, his compensation was strictly calculated by standard union guidelines for a very short shooting schedule. To secure his vital, high-stakes character work that ignited the entire bloody narrative, the studio handed him a modest, flat upfront salary, officially estimated between $10,000 and $15,000. In the stark reality of 2026, the 71-year-old veteran remains vibrantly alive, living securely far beyond the brutal shadows of the gritty 90s thriller. He never vanished into the devastating obscurity that often swallows minor supporting players. Instead, Badalucco brilliantly pivoted his intense, dramatic chops to conquer American television, eventually securing a highly prestigious Emmy Award for his massive run on the acclaimed legal drama, The Practice. Heavily insulated by a secure, decades-long career, he firmly rejected the desperate scramble of the Hollywood machine, choosing to work strictly on his own comfortable terms. The modern public does not view him merely as a forgotten, tragically doomed criminal shot down in a bloody hallway. They fiercely revere him as a definitive, Emmy-winning powerhouse who successfully manipulated a tiny $15,000 paycheck into permanent, unbreakable artistic immortality. Number 7. Willi One Blood, $50, $10. At 26, Willi One Blood, a fiercely independent reggae musician embedded in the gritty New York cultural scene, stepped directly into the chaotic, bullet-riddled crossfire. He flawlessly embodied Blood, the visually striking, heavily armed DEA agent ruthlessly executing orders under Stansfield's corrupt command. Bringing pure, unspoken street authenticity to the menacing law enforcement ensemble, his physical presence was absolutely vital for the terrifying apartment massacre. Because he was cast in a minor dialogue-light supporting role requiring only a handful of days on the punishing sets, his financial compensation was rigidly capped by the baseline union minimums. For standing in the intense cinematic crossfire without a single back-end percentage point, the production handed him a shockingly tiny upfront salary, officially estimated between $5,000 and $10,000. In the stark reality of 2026, the 58-year-old artist remains vibrantly alive, living completely untethered from the toxic Hollywood machine. Never obsessed with desperately chasing hollow blockbuster cameos, he intelligently pivoted back to his core passion. He secured his own highly unique cultural legacy, dominating massive 90s movie soundtracks and fiercely maintaining a respected footprint in the international reggae industry. He completely rejected the soul-crushing attrition rate of the studio system, choosing to preserve his pure artistic authenticity on his own uncompromising terms. The modern public does not dismiss him merely as a forgotten, underpaid casualty of a fictional drug raid. They deeply revere him as a striking, multi-talented pioneer who manipulated a microscopic $5,000 paycheck into permanent, unbreakable 90s cult immortality. The unforgiving Hollywood machine thrives on brutal financial inequality, but the masterpiece this cast forged in that New York apartment remains unbroken. Whether their journeys led to multi-million-dollar empires or quiet independence far from the ruthless spotlight, their visceral performances are absolutely immortal. The studio system will always attempt to bury its darkest financial secrets in the shadows. Do not let the next untold story escape. Hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications and join the investigation before the absolute truth is permanently erased.